complete or perfect. It is likewise thought to be all-wise, good, and powerful. Theism, then,
Brothers and sorors, the imperator of the Rosicrucian order, Amor.
there are various stages of barbarism and savagery evidenced in tribes and primitive society today. It is presumed that from such primitive humans, the more advanced ones have emerged. In a study of these primitive and savage peoples, anthropologists and ethnologists find a reflection of our past. In the behavior of these tribes may be found the roots of many of our beliefs and customs. It is agreed that man naturally does not have an intuitive knowledge of God. In other words, he does not have an indwelling, uniform perception or conception of God. There is no mental image of God acceptable to all men. The conception of God by primitive people was arrived at by inner and outer experiences. Let us look at illustration A. Here is a portrayal of prehistoric man, perhaps of the Pleistocene age, 100,000 years ago. He is experiencing a phenomenon of nature, a bolt of lightning that terrifies him. He later begins to reflect upon this experience and what it may possibly be or mean to him. From such reflection arises certain definite ideas which become accepted explanations of the experience. But man also has certain intense internal experiences as feelings and emotions. Let us now look at illustration B. Here is primitive man sleeping. It seems that he leaves his body and starts to hunt. Suddenly, he awakens and finds that he has not moved from his resting place. We say he dreamed. But to the primitive mind, it seemed as though there was some spirit, some entity within himself that journeyed forth. The idea of a spirit within became a tremendous factor in man's arriving at the conception that there is a supernatural world. Men are inclined to seek causal connections in the external world of experience. When they believe they perceive the cause of some phenomenon, some happening, such appears to give it a comprehensible order. Without apparent connections between events and things, all seems chaotic and confusing to the mind. Man is causative and purposive in most of his actions, and he presumes, therefore, that all that occurs likewise has causes. The savage, the primitive mind, argues from the known to the unknown. He tries to explain the unsolved by something that is known. In other words, he transfers an explanation of the known so that it will fit and satisfy the unknown. Look at illustration A. It depicts a primitive man holding a flint in one hand and striking it with another so as to cause sparks to fly in order to ignite dry leaves and start a fire. Illustration B shows a bolt of lightning striking earthward. Most primitive tribes think that the bolt of lightning in the sky is made by someone acting in a similar manner as they do to produce the sparks of their flints. In fact, they think that flints on the ground are thunderstones from above. The important point here is that man transfers a known cause to explain that which is unknown to him. Regardless of our civilization today and all its various advances, there is a substratum of belief in the efficacy of magic. The prevalence of sympathetic magic today in the ignorant classes of Europe and America is the same as existed in ancient Egypt. By this is meant that primitive reasoning is almost always basically the same in every age of history. There are two basic principles of magic. One is that like produces like, or an effect resembles its cause. Second, that things that have been in contact with each other continue to act on each other at a distance after the contact has been severed. The principle that like produces like is called the Law of Similarity. The principle that things once in contact with each other retain a relationship is called the Law of Contact or Contagion. In similarity, the magician implies that he can produce an effect by imitating it. For example, see illustration A. Here we have an effigy of a human. It is an image made of straw and cloth by a shaman or tribal magician. It represents an enemy. The magician has pierced it with needles in the areas where vital organs are located. By the law of similarity, he believes there is a connection between his acts and the effect upon the living human. The living human, he thinks, will suffer disease and pain in the organs corresponding to those pierced by the needles. Illustration B is a necklace made of the teeth and claws of animals. According to the presumed law of contagion, the wearer of this will have imparted to him the qualities of the animals, their ferocity and strength. Persons who wear charms and amulets today are often perpetuating the principle of the law of contact or contagion magic. In general, magic, which still prevails extensively throughout the world, is a spurious system of natural law to produce conditions desired. It is an attempt on the part of man to invoke nature by compulsion to obey his demands. Man seeks to control unseen forces so that they will do his bidding, regardless of his human motive. There are certain psychological factors underlying sympathetic magic, which we just previously illustrated. It is a wrong association of ideas, as, for example, that things similar in appearance must be related. Look at illustration A. It is a primitive West African tribal death bone. It is believed that when this is pointed at an individual by the tribal medicine man, it invokes forces of nature so as to cause the death of the person at whom it is pointed. Illustrations B and C are also West African tribal images used in connection with incantations to invoke magical powers. All these objects are part of the primitive African collection in the Rosicrucian Egyptian Museum. It must be remembered that there is also a negative magic. This consists of certain taboos or prohibitions intended to stop the ordinary processes of some aspect of nature. It is also important to remember that in magic, man first gained the idea that acts committed at home in a certain way would affect things or conditions at a distance. Just what is religion? There are innumerable definitions. Perhaps one of the most succinct and explanatory is that of William James, classical psychologist and philosopher. He said, "In the broadest and most general terms possible, one might say that religious life consists in the belief that there is an unseen order and that our supreme good lies in harmoniously adjusting ourselves thereto." Unquote. Arguing from his limited experience, primitive man creates multitudes of spirits, gods, in his likeness to explain the phenomena of nature. In our illustration here, we show a row of monoliths, huge stones, which primitive man has erected so that the sun, when it rises, will appear to travel above the path of these stones. The apparent rising and setting of the sun were among the first natural phenomena worshipped by man. The sun has long been considered in primitive society as a supernatural entity or deity. There are two fundamental elements in all religions. One is the belief in powers higher than man. The second is the attempt by man to propitiate, that is, try and appease the transcendent power which he believes exists. Consequently, in almost all religions, this higher power is conceived as a conscious, purposeful one. These supernatural agents are often believed to have the same characteristics as humans. In magic, it is believed that these gods can be coerced to do man's will. In religion, however, man makes an appeal to the will of the god in his behalf. There are two forms of natural religion as practiced by primitive peoples, which have left an impact on the world's great living religions. There is the worship of nature. In illustration A, we show the sun. This apparently has been the most important natural phenomenon to primitive man. The sun has long been worshipped by religious sects, or has been a symbol of a supernatural power. In illustration B, we have the night and the stars. These celestial bodies were also worshipped, for example, by the Babylonians, Assyrians, Chaldeans, and Persians, as well as other great civilizations of the past. Out of such worship by the Babylonians and Chaldeans, there emerged astrology and finally the science of astronomy. The other great form of natural religion is the worship of the dead. This is depicted by illustration C. It is a grave with a cairn or mound of stones over it. It is the worship of the dead that brought about the elaborate burial methods of the ancients. In fact, the worship of the dead is based upon the premise of immortality of the human consciousness or the spirit or soul of the deceased. In these three illustrations, we symbolize the three principal types of behavior in religion. Illustration A represents the mechanical. This means that man, by certain routine acts, a sort of mechanical procedure or habitual way of living, is automatically, we can say, brought into contact with the supernatural forces or gods in which he believes. Illustration B alludes to the coercive form of religion. This is where magic and religion are interrelated. This illustration is of a ceremonial wand used by the dervishes, a religious sect, to invoke curses or malevolent powers. It is an attempt to coerce supernatural entities to do man's bidding. Illustration C alludes to the third type of religious belief, the anthropomorphic. In this type, man conceives the God to be in human form, with human qualities and characteristics to which he can appeal. Anthropologists and students of the subject are generally of the opinion that magic is much older than rationalism or reasoning as we think of the word. Of course, magic too requires that certain ideas be had in the mind. However, they are principally the result of a mistaken association of ideas rather than conclusions arrived at analytically. Illustration A shows a skull and a manuscript of magical inscriptions. Both are used by individuals in the practice of magic. The skull, since it is related to death, is thought to have a link with powers beyond this life. The inscriptions are usually formulas by which the magician hopes he can command the forces of nature. Illustration B symbolizes prayer and the practice of religion whereby man enters into supplication to a higher power to intervene in his behalf. Priests of various religions have usually been hostile to magicians. The magician is confident in his ability to influence natural powers, but to the priests this seems blasphemous, for they profess to be awed by and to reverence the divine majesty. Illustration C refers to science. Science compels the God to assume a more supreme nature. It takes the direction of natural forces out of the God's direct control and puts them in the arts and techniques of man. At first, with primitive man, there was no clear distinction made by him between the objective and subjective. In other words, man, in the very primitive stage, is not able to distinguish between himself and his surroundings. As we have previously said, it was perhaps the dreams he had that first gave man his subjective aspect. Man came to identify the functions or qualities of things as being their internal spirit or life. What a thing appeared to be, it was thought that it had intended to be. Thus, for example, a running stream was thought to be alive. Moving clouds were thought to be alive. The wind was also considered alive. This belief that all things are alive is one of the earliest forms of religion and is called animism. Illustration A depicts a boulder crashing down from a cliff. According to the belief in animism, man thinks of the falling boulder, which nearly strikes him, as having an internal spirit which caused it to intentionally crash down to strike and kill him. Illustration B is a tree that is bent in the wind and seems to moan as it is lashed by the storm. To the primitive mind, all these elements are alive: the wind, the tree, the storm itself. In fact, in many primitive tribes, the word for spirit and breath, or air, is the same. Primitive peoples create a multitude of spirits and gods in their likeness. This multiplicity of gods is known as polytheism. This was done by personifying the different phenomena of nature. These gods usually differed from one another in their omnipotence, their benevolent or evil nature. In our illustration here, we see examples of ancient Egyptian polytheism. These two figures are the goddess Isis to the left and her husband-brother Osiris. They are but two of the multiplicity of gods believed in by the great masses of people of ancient Egypt. Isis was the goddess of fertility. Osiris was the great god of the underworld and judge of the dead. The Greeks humanized their many gods. They attributed to them both the virtues and vices of mankind. In other words, the gods were thought to fight with each other, to love, to hate, and to be jealous.
Please turn this tape over for side 2.